summer, Phase 5 of the MCU came to a close, and with the release of the Fantastic Four First Steps, we have entered into Phase 6. That means after a 2-year hiatus, it is time to stop and rank all 53 MCU movies, Disney Plus shows, and specials from the worst to the best. In last place, She-Hulk Attorney at Law. From beginning to end, the MCU's biggest misfire. Now, this show was probably never going to be for me. They decided to make a legal comedy about a single woman in her 30s love life. If it wasn't in the MCU, it's not a show that I would have chosen to watch. But beyond that, there were a lot of problems here. One of the secrets of the MCU that just made it click is that from the beginning, they decided to take the material seriously, but not themselves.
It's the balance, right, between poking fun at it or taking the piss out of a moment, but also taking it seriously.
She-Hulk gets this formula entirely backwards, where it doesn't take the material seriously at all, where the writers openly admitted to writing segments just to troll the audience.
Wait, you like this?
Oh, yeah.
He's basically insulting you.
It plays like a parody of the MCU from beginning to end. In particular, as you move into the final episode, it feels like it's full-blown trying to roast the MCU and its audience by insulting the idea of wanting a big boss fight at the end. Then we break the fourth wall to go into the writer's room to insult the writers of the MCU.
Hello, Jennifer.
Kevin?
So it doesn't take the MCU seriously at all, but it takes itself very seriously, where in the first episode of the show, we have She-Hulk lecture Hulk on how she can control her rage better because she's a woman and he's a man, and women have it harder than men, which is an offensively reductive view of gender issues in the 21st century. But more importantly, it's awfully self-important for a very silly show. In addition, the writers said that they wanted to make a sex-positive show for children.
Why are you being weird?
So I just think they completely missed the mark on this show. I understand wanting to expand your brand, but not like this.
You almost tasted that. Num 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 num, eat it up.
Best season ever!
Number 52, Thor, Love, and Thunder. Unlike She-Hulk, this is a movie I was very excited to see. Because I was a big fan of Thor Ragnarok, they cast comic book movie legend Christian Bale as the villain, and they went with a villain that made it so the film was essentially tackling the theological and philosophical problem of evil, which is a fantastic idea for a Thor movie and a way to have an entertaining film that also is thoughtful and deep. But that's not the film that Taika Waititi delivered. He delivered this irreverent film that has the exact same problem of She-Hulk, that it doesn't take the MCU seriously. Where we go to New Asgard and there's an ice cream place called Infinity Cones making a joke of universal genocide. We've got screaming goats every 30 seconds. And we've turned Thor into such a joke that he's in a love triangle with a girl and a hammer, and we flick off his clothes so we can have naked Chris Hemsworth. Here I am. On paper, this should be one of the most thoughtful and thought-provoking MCU films of them all. But the movie that we got was one of the silliest, goofiest, and most irreverent of the MCU.
How bad is it? My God, Superman, it's a nightmare.
Next up, Secret Invasion. What should have been this tense, mature thriller turned out to be this bland, universe-breaking show that just felt like more content for a streaming service. This one came out deep into the era of quantity over quality and is one of the many victims of lack of vision and lack of oversight, where they were adapting a very popular and famous storyline from the comics And instead of bringing any of the gravitas of that run to a TV show, you get this meandering show that never builds any momentum, kills people off willy-nilly where you don't feel anything, and it builds to a conclusion where it felt like the show accidentally introduced the most powerful character in the entire MCU, and it didn't even realize it.
Worst ending ever.
Big part of the problem here is that they started shooting without a script that they were happy with, that led to a scenario where they ended up doing 4 months of reshoots, when if you realize 4 months of reshoots on a show this short means they reshot the entire thing, and you just feel that. There's no cohesive vision. There's nothing kind of pulling it together. It's just a series of scenes cut together, building to a finale that doesn't make any sense, that undermines Rhodey's credibility over the last, I guess, through Endgame, which is once again so frustrating that they took something that should be really, really cool and made something so unbelievably bad.
Sometimes people drop stinkers.
50 Echo, probably the MCU project with the smallest footprint. It's not the worst, it's not the most offensive, it didn't have a troubled production, it just made absolutely no impact. And that's because it's a project that never should have been greenlit in the first place. It came out of an era where they were just trying to produce as much content as possible, and Bob Iger himself openly admitted that at a certain point in time, they were just trying to populate their streaming service, and that diluted their focus.
In our zeal to grow our content, we ended up taxing our people way beyond where they had been. Marvel's a great example of that. They had not been in the TV business. Not only did they increase their movie output, but they ended up making a number of television series. And frankly, it diluted focus and attention.
For a decade, MCU films were events. When WandaVision kicked off, it was the water cooler show that everybody was talking about. But through their pure ego, they decided to just crank out so many projects that all of a sudden Echo gets her own show. A D-list comic book character who is no one's favorite side character from Hawkeye, and she's given a show that has no interesting hook to it. It's just more Marvel content.
We can do no wrong and this system has no flaws.
And therefore, it just came and went, and no one noticed and no one cared besides the Daredevil cameo and Kingpin having a small part in it. Like I said, it's not the worst. It's fine, but it just leaves absolutely no impact. There's no reason to re-explore it. It builds up to a really goofy finale, and so it's just stuff so that they can have more content on their streaming service. While I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. If you're up for the challenge, share your ranking of all 53 Marvel Studios movies, Disney Plus shows, and specials. If not, what are your favorites? And what are the ones that you hate, that you wish they hadn't made? Number 49, Agatha All Along. Like She-Hulk, a singing witch show isn't interesting to me. If this wasn't in the MCU, I wouldn't have even watched the trailer for this show. One of the strategies with Disney Plus was to make shows for specific niches to attempt to expand the brand, which I get what they were going for, but it kind of had the reverse effect because the MCU was already the most popular brand with the broadest appeal on the entire planet. So by making these niche shows, they just segmented their audience and shrunk it down into a bunch of clusters. And that's what I feel like this show did. I get that some of you absolutely love it. That's awesome. If this is your thing, I don't want to hold that against you. I'm not even really going to crap on it. I just didn't connect with it at all. I liked Agatha as a side character on WandaVision, but I'm not really interested in her as a lead character. Watching a show that's a little campy, a little spooky, a little bit of a musical, I just wouldn't watch a TV show like that if it wasn't in Marvel. And so I only watched it basically as homework because this is what I do for a living. And I just think that hurts the MCU overall to have these niche projects for segmented audiences, and this one absolutely wasn't for me. Then we have Ironheart. When they first announced the show, I was actually pretty interested in it. I enjoyed the character in Wakanda Forever, but they shot this show before Wakanda Forever came out and then left it on a shelf for 2 years, which is a massive red flag. And when it finally released, I thought it was pretty obvious why they shelved this one. It's a very peculiar show because it feels like it's trying to be a superhero show, but the actual plot is a villain origin story. It's a tragedy. Riri is written to be so self-destructive, impatient, and broken that I can't root for her, but she's not compelling enough to be interesting. The show never explains why this brilliant inventor who's been discovered by the news, Wakanda, and the college system can't sell her inventions or get a job at any number of a zillion companies, or why she has to turn to a life of crime. And so all the drama and conflict of the season feels totally unearned. And in the end, she doesn't learn her lesson. She continues down this destructive path and makes a literal deal with the devil, just like the main villain of the show. It's her villain origin story, but it plays like a superhero story. So it is just kind of a bizarre show that I don't think really works or makes any sense.
Madness and stupidity.
Thor the Dark World, a victim of Marvel's New York City creative committee. After the success of Iron Man, Marvel headquarters in New York City put together a committee to increase the quality and make sure they could continue to sell toys. But this group, called the Creative Committee, ended up being this group of very out-of-touch people that had the authority to micromanage everything.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
And this led to a bunch of disastrous results on a handful of projects. One of them was Thor the Dark World, where initially Patty Jenkins was supposed to direct this film. That's why Natalie Portman signed on and was very excited to be a part of the project. It was going to be like Romeo and Juliet in space. And then the creative committee basically ran her off. And instead, we got a TV director that his other claim to fame is directing Terminator Genesis. The writers on the project wanted Hela to be the villain of Thor Ragnarok, a much better film. Keep in mind, the writers here are the same exact people that would write Captain America the Winter Soldier the next year, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. But the creative committee sabotaged their plans and wouldn't allow them to use Hela because they did not think Hela would sell enough toys. Thus, we got Malekith.
That doesn't make sense.
The most generic, forgettable main villain in the entire MCU who has absolutely no distinct personality traits. How many kids have you seen playing with Malekith toys? Beyond that, it's another project that just lacked any clear direction. After they did principal photography, the director was basically sidelined, and they brought in Joss Whedon to do over 30 days of rewrites and reshoots on the project, drastically changing Loki's role and fate in the project, giving the project massive tonal whiplash when you watch it. And it's just blockbuster mediocrity, where it's this type of project where it's slick. There's a bunch of movie stars giving charismatic performances. There's a bunch of expensive visual shots. Everything's in focus, and it has absolutely no impact whatsoever. I will say this, though, despite the movie's many flaws and how forgettable it is as a film in and of itself, Endgame makes this an important piece of the bigger narrative, and that's one of the strengths of the early phases, that even the weakest projects could be pulled up and feel pivotal because they were part of this grander narrative. 46, Captain Marvel, the biggest beneficiary of the Infinity War Endgame boom, where this movie made over $1 billion. And when you look at how many beloved and great MCU films didn't hit $1 billion when this movie did, it's kind of remarkable, especially given that this really isn't anybody's favorite MCU film, and very few people think that it is a top tier MCU film. Now, it's nice to have an MCU film set in the 90s. I like seeing this younger, less cynical version of Nick Fury, and even that section of it has kind of this X-Files vibe to it that I enjoyed quite a bit. But Captain Marvel just isn't a compelling lead.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
She starts out as the most powerful person in the room, and by the end of the movie, she discovers she's even more powerful. No one is really a threat to her. She's able to easily overcome whatever obstacles are in front of her, and thus there's no real tension in the story. The area where there could be some intrigue and cleverness to the plot is in the dynamics of the Kree and the Skrull, and the way the movie kind of shifts your perspective of who's the heroes, who's the villain, who's good, who's bad. But even that, I think, is really messy and mishandled. It has such tragic implications, and the movie never properly addresses them. So it just makes for a very weird, clunky film whose tone doesn't match the undercurrent of the actual plot of the film, and it has a lead character that simply isn't that interesting. Number 45, The Marvels. And this is a project where it's difficult to not feel bad for the cast and director Nia DaCosta because it was so mismanaged by Kevin Feige and the MCU Parliament, the current overseeing committee, where this is a movie where they wanted it to attract new audiences, but it's not a good on-ramp for new audiences because it's a sequel to too many films and TV shows. It requires homework to even understand who the characters are on a basic level. It feels like pure arrogance on the part of Disney and Marvel Studios to require audiences to watch multiple seasons of television shows on a streaming service in order to understand the sequel to a billion-dollar film. Superficially, it can be entertaining, largely because Iman Vellani is super charming. I really enjoy her in the role of Miss Marvel. She just has this infectious, naive energy to her. But it's a victim of an overly cluttered project where Kevin Feige was spread way too thin and couldn't properly shepherd and develop the script. Nia DaCosta, before the movie even came out, said, yeah, it's a Kevin Feige film, and basically distanced herself from her own movie, and more recently, just this year, has said, yeah, the movie they released is not the movie I pitched, and it's not the movie that I shot. The MCU got cold feet after Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and started trying to course correct, and so they did massive rewrites, reshoots, reworked the movie in the editing room, and that's what it feels like when you're watching the film. It's like 4 different movies duct taped together with reshoots. It feels like big chunks of the movie are missing, and what is there barely even makes any sense.
This is a mess. None of these storylines make any sense.
There's a segment in this movie that's the exact plot of the movie Spaceballs.
That's about the dumbest idea I've ever seen.
Like, that's crazy that a serious MCU film is borrowing from freaking Spaceballs. And so a movie that you just feel bad for a lot of the people involved, and at the same time you look at Marvel Studios and go, this is what you get when you prioritize quantity over quality and stop overseeing your projects properly. Next up, Eternals. Now, this movie didn't work for me. I don't particularly enjoy it, but I respect the ambition here. Where the projects lower on this list felt like bad ideas, complete misfires, committee-driven projects, underdeveloped projects, that's not the case here. I feel like there was something here that was a risk worth taking, even if it didn't pay off. There was an ambition, this cosmic mythology, there's a moral complexity to it, there's an elegance to the storytelling, and all of those things, I think, make for something worth trying. This was a mistake worth making. because it was driven by an actual vision and storytelling rather than quotas from committees and Disney or whatever. Does it work? I don't really think so. There's too many characters, there's too rich of a mythology, and I think it would have worked much better as a Disney Plus show than as a single movie. And when you just dive so deep into it, there's characters dying before we know who they are or why it matters. And when you move into the third act, I think the nature of the moral complexity we're supposed to relate to the drama of should we kill all the humans doesn't really work because, you know, the audience for the movie is humans. So we're on the side of, hey, let me live. But I appreciate that they actually tried to tell this more complex story with more thematic depth to it. 43, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, the much anticipated debut of Kang, turned out to be one of the MCU's biggest disappointments. I'm not as antagonistic towards this project as others, but it's just a completely bland film. It's a classic example of a project which feels like it was directed by committee. And in the case of this movie, it was basically directed by Marvel Studios' Parliament, the committee of producers that oversee these projects. You'll hear in interviews with actors, they refer to the they.
And then I think they did want the opportunity to change some stuff. And so they just want that freedom.
That has power. They're rarely referring to the director or the writers. It's the Parliament, these producers. And the MCU has so many moving parts and so many projects that they have this paralysis of analysis and they're unable to make final decisions on some of these scripts. And so they just keep writing them and reshooting them and reworking them in the editing room. And in the case of this movie, they were reshooting it all the way up until a month before the movie came out.
They do rework stuff.
And they changed the ending of the film. And when you have projects that heavily mangled with a group of people, it's rarely brilliant. And instead, you're left with these generic films because you don't have a singular creative vision. You don't have a singular voice. You don't have a single statement they're trying to make. There's too many cooks.
Too many cooks, too many cooks.
It's very difficult to have a cohesive and compelling story when there's so many different mandates on everything that you have to get right and set up for the future and all these moving parts with so many different people chiming in. So the results are rarely fantastic. Evangeline Lilly said the script read fairly straightforward.
Do you know what's strange? Is the script reads much more straightforward than the film itself. When I saw the film, I was like, this is, like you said, this is bananas.
Yeah. Despite the big finale feeling like this Star Wars-esque rebellion against the Empire, you never feel any real stakes because our main antagonist is defeated by Ant-Man and a group of ants, which feels very anticlimactic for a villain that's supposed to be worthy of the Avengers. Who needs the Avengers when Ant-Man and his friends can do it on their own? Seems like a movie that was just absolutely ruined by being overthought and reworked rather than just trusting a writer and a director to tell a story. Next up, Moon Knight. This one I was so excited for. I know a bunch of you love it, but it was just a huge disappointment.
You don't like it?
For me. The show itself seems to be struggling with the same multiple personalities that its lead character is struggling with, where it starts off as this intriguing mystery about what's happening to this very weird guy. Then it starts meandering around as this globe-trotting adventure with Egyptian gods and a religious cult and this guy's love life. And by the end of it, we are traveling around on a boat in Egyptian afterlife.
Wow, that was weird.
And returning to the Great Pyramids for a Power Rangers boss fight.
Go, go, Power Rangers!
I went into Moon Knight hoping to get a superhero show about this darker, more complicated hero, and instead I got a show with very little Moon Knight in it and a lot of traveling around the globe. I just don't understand why they chose this genre, this angle to go with the character.
And you blew it!
You blew it.
41, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. On paper, this should have been an easy layup for the MCU. They took two characters people already liked, that already had good chemistry, and put them into a proven genre, a buddy action comedy, and somehow they still kind of missed here, where it feels caught between trying to be a movie and a TV show at the same time, where it neither has the brevity and pacing of a film or the depth and character work of a TV show, so it feels shallow while being stretched out at the exact same time. And it wants to be this light buddy action comedy, but it also wants to tackle race in America, and it never fully does either quite right. There's also story issues in here where it doesn't allow our villains to truly be villainous. It never justifies why Bucky would free Zemo and rather than just work with new Captain America. There's just all these things that I never was able to buy into the choices that the show was making. It never was smart enough to earn lecturing the audience or having Sam give speeches. Some of it kind of works because I like the characters. Some of the action works, but the story, the villains absolutely do not come together and gets literally preachy by the end. Today's video is brought to you by Audible. If you're like me and you like to read with your ears, not your eyes, I highly recommend Audible. You can get a free audiobook of your choice and a free 30-day trial of Audible at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler. Since you're watching this video, I highly recommend you get the book MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. A bunch of the information in this video comes from that book, and there's so much more I would have loved to have been able to put in this video, but it would be hours and hours long if I did that. And you can get all that information by checking out this book by signing up for that free trial of Audible at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler, and you can get a free audiobook. I recommend you get MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. It is a must-read book for all MCU fans. 40, Captain America Brave New World, a movie I went into with modest expectations that the movie basically met. Wasn't excited about the project when they announced the writers and the director for the project, and then they delayed the film a year in order to do reshoots. Whether that was 3 weeks or 3 months, the issue was they were doing reshoots to fix a movie that they didn't think was working all that well.
What's going on with Captain America Brave World?
But I am not a part of that. The script went through a lot of rewrites and reshoots, and so what I was there to do, essentially my role got either repurposed or completely erased.
And there's some stuff in here that works. I like that the MCU feels more cohesive again, and that it's a little bit more serious of a film, a bit of a paranoia thriller. All that stuff kind of worked for me, but it also feels kind of like cinematic leftovers, where there's a brainwashing storyline. We did that in Winter Soldier. There's a super brain that can predict what's going to happen. We had the algorithm in the Winter Soldier. So it's like borrowing heavily from a much better film, but it's also a movie that feels like a goofier version of it, that you can feel the movie being duct taped together with these reshoots. There's some very goofy elements in here. So another disappointment, but hopefully the end of an era of these undercooked movies. Next, Iron Man 2. After the success of Iron Man, Marvel Studios wanted to strike while the iron was hot, while Jon Favreau was like, hey, maybe we should take our time to make sure we keep the quality up. But the studio really wanted a quick turnaround because they had a whole slate of movies they wanted to do, and they were rushing to get to Avengers. And this is an early example of some reoccurring issues with the MCU. Filming without a completed script and putting the meta-narrative over the individual film. Iron Man, the original film, was filmed without really a completed script. They rolled the dice, and the first movie had a clean slate without a bunch of expectations on the project, just the single goal of making a good movie. This time, it had the weight of public expectations as well as the responsibility of setting up Avengers. They rolled the dice again, and I just don't think it paid off nearly as well.
It's always worse the second time around.
Individual scenes work, action scenes are cool, the cast are still charming, but story-wise, it just doesn't really work because it doesn't have a single plot. It has like 5 subplots tied together. Tony never knows that Whiplash is a threat until he shows up and suddenly appears. He literally thinks that our villain is dead throughout most of the runtime of the movie. Tony doesn't know the plot of the film is happening because he's too busy off subplotting the entire runtime. At the time that it came out, it was enjoyable enough because we got more of Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. But given that every other project that Tony is in is better than this, time hasn't been very kind to this project. 38, Spider-Man Far From Home. Superficially speaking, this movie has a lot of fun elements to it. The cast are fun, the Mysterio sequences are very, very cool, but it's a movie that has plenty of charm, but absolutely no sense, and that just drags the movie down for me, where it just feels like absolutely nothing in this movie makes any sense whatsoever. The basic setup for the movie is that Tony Stark left his military-grade glasses to an underage high schooler who had been dead for 5 years without any instructions or safety protocols.
That's a weird story.
That's total nonsense. Our main villain's plan is to trick the world into making him the new lead Avenger because, once again, a villain is motivated by scorn for Tony Stark.
One more time.
Something very familiar about all this.
But what exactly is his plan here? To become the lead Avenger so when there's a big threat, he will die? Like, what is he trying to do in this movie? And then there's just scenes that are unbelievably ill-conceived, where a grown woman goes to a underage high school boy and tells him to take off all of his clothes in front of her.
Take off your clothes.
Okay.
Just play this out differently. What if Nick Fury has told Zendaya to take all of her clothes off?
No, don't like that.
As soon as you say that, you go, whoa, you can't do that. But they did the reverse, and it's in the movie. So, hey, it's a movie that absolutely has plenty of fun to go around. But the plot is just so unbelievably flimsy. Then we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Without question, one of the hottest takes I have ever shared on this channel is that I was disappointed by Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
No, you don't get it. It's a concept.
Now, a bunch of people on the internet have interpreted that as I hated this movie. I've never said I hated this movie. I have never hated this movie. I was disappointed by this movie, but it has kind of grown on me a little bit in light of how disappointing and committee-driven so many projects in Phase 4 and 5 have been. This movie, being so clearly James Gunn-driven, is refreshing to me. And likewise, some of my issues with this film, with the relationship between Drax and Mantis, have been curbed based on the holiday special in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But I still do feel like there's some tonal and story issues here, where structurally this is a very peculiar film where each act has a different villain. Our main villain isn't a threat until we move into the third act and he reveals himself as a villain. So the story doesn't have kind of a sense of momentum moving forward, like we're moving towards a specific thing. It's just kind of we're meandering around, and then it turns out we're in this big gigantic final battle. And so it just doesn't work for me on that story level for that reason. And then tonally, it's always been a very off-putting film to me, where it'll do like literally Looney Tunes humor and then cut to baby Groot, child Groot being tortured by men, child abuse. And Drax being so mean to Mantis, who is literally a slave girl with poor self-esteem.
I am hideous?
You are horrifying to look at, yes.
It's just off-putting to me. So it's a movie that I get a lot of the elements of it. I love the Guardians, but this to me is by far the weakest of the Guardians projects. 36, Miss Marvel. This is a frustrating one for me because half of the season was a really pleasant surprise, and the other half of the season felt like a lackluster second season smashed into the middle of a good season. It seems like the show had two wildly different creative teams, and it kind of did. The first and sixth episode were directed by the guys that did Bad Boys for Life. And so it has this youthful energy that fit perfectly with Miss Marvel. And there's even like visual onomatopoeia and its own unique vibe that fit nicely into the world of the MCU. And then episodes 4 and 5 were directed by Shameen Obaid Chinoy, who Wikipedia describes as a Pakistani-Canadian journalist, filmmaker, and activist known for her work in films that highlight gender inequality against women. Most of her filmography consists of non-fiction documentaries, and you feel that contrast while you're watching the season. It starts off with Bad Boys for Life fun, and then it transitions to someone who does serious documentary work and wants to infuse that into this TV show. It starts off as an energetic superhero show about a local high school superhero in her community. And then the next thing we know, episode 5 kicks off with a 20-minute flashback that's a dramatic sequence set in the 1940s showing the effects of the partition of India on this particular family. Like, that is a wild tone shift from where this thing starts off to where it ends up to where it goes back to in the last episode of the season. And that just sabotaged the season for me. It would have jumped up 10, 15 spots on this list, except they had to have like 2 different visions for the show, one of them dramatically better than the other. 35, Black Widow, another weird one because it feels like a long-lost Phase 3 movie that came out 5 years too late after the lead character had already died. And we kind of know the reason that this happened. The New York City Creative Committee wouldn't allow Kevin Feige to make a Black Widow movie because they didn't think it would sell enough toys. So we didn't end up getting the movie until way past when the film should have come out. And the movie overall it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag for me. I like the fact that we're doing a spy family movie. There's certain ingredients in that I find very appealing. Getting to know Natasha more as a character. I think Yelena is a standout who's just immediately charming, fits right in.
This thing that you do when you whip your hair when you're fighting. It's a fighting pose. You're a total poser.
Not a poser.
Red Guardian puts a big grin on my face. I just think he's a very funny buffoon of a character. But it's another movie that feels written and directed by committee. And we kind of know that's what happened. One of the first people they approached to direct the film wanted to do it, but they basically told her, hey, we've got the action handled. We just want you to do the dramatic scenes with Scarlet. David Harbour's given interviews where he said that they completely reworked the third act of the movie.
Like Black Widow, the entire third act was reworked as we were shooting, and which is incredible. And so they just want that freedom.
And you can see that in the quality of the VFX and how it just kind of turns into this video game sequence at the end of the film. So I think there's a lot more here than some people give it credit for, but there's also some just really bad choices where they turned a really cool villain like Taskmaster into a plot device that was completely forgettable by the end of the film. So, a mixed bag. Next up, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I enjoyed this film more than a lot of people, largely on the basis of just enjoying all the Sam Raimi-isms in the film. And not Spider-Man Sam Raimi, Evil Dead Sam Raimi.
Groovy.
Where when you get zombie Doctor Strange, some of the horror sequences with Scarlet Witch, this is horror Sam Raimi in the MCU. But the reality is that the movie feels 50% directed by Sam Raimi, 50% directed by committee. And this is one of the most infamously reworked MCU projects that they have ever done, where one of the lead actresses gave an interview where she said there was over 30 drafts of the script written. Elizabeth Olsen shared the exact same sentiments in an interview.
Then Doctor Strange, like, we know those films often are fluid, and it seems like this one was a bit fluid. Like,
so fluid. I there's a point in making the movie where I just stopped reading drafts. I was like, this is just gonna change again.
And this is a project that was both a victim of indecisiveness and changing of direction, as well as COVID, which compounded each of these different problems. So when they went to go shoot the Illuminati sequence, the people in the sequence did not know who they were acting with. In some cases, didn't even know what characters were going to be in the sequence with them.
So did you even know which characters were going to end up in that finished scene? Like,
I didn't. I think that they were, we did lots of different things, lots of different takes, and then they kind of, the way that they edited it was like, suddenly just very quick.
They shot by themselves in front of a green screen, and you can kind of feel that when you watch the movie.
Was everybody there when you shot your stuff?
No. John Krasinski wasn't there. Patrick Stewart wasn't there.
Were you alone? Like, were you with the other actors?
I was alone.
The magic of movie making.
The big scene, I think each one of the leading actors, they were shot on their own.
So it was weird.
That's what I've heard.
Frustrating and disappointing.
It's frustrating because there's a lot in here that I really enjoy, that I find it very cool that it's in an MCU film, but also I'm also very clearly watching a Frankenstein's monster of a movie that has been duct taped together with reshoots.
Just CGI is going to sort everything out. And
I did my voiceover work to make everything that I'd already done on camera make sense. That's how we did Doctor Strange. That one was a wild ride.
33, The Incredible Hulk. This is a project that a lot of people have always written off as one of the worst, and it's not. It's just different. It's a bit of an oddity in the MCU for a variety of reasons. It's the only MCU film distributed by Universal. It has a distinctly more serious tone with less humor in it. It's the only one where Norton played the Hulk. But more importantly, behind the scenes, there is a big difference. It's one of the very few MCU projects where the lead actor had a tremendous amount of control, where Ed was the star, he rewrote the script, and he kind of acted as a producer of the film. And so this led to some big and public fighting over the edit of the film, where he had this longer, more introspective version where he had these kind of pretentious ideas for what he wanted to do with the movie. They wanted a quicker action film. And so why are all of the MCU films producer driven now? Because of Edward Norton. They never wanted to make that mistake ever again. But the movie is a lot better than most people give it credit for. The 3 Hulk sequences are each unique and have cool Hulk action in them. One of them's kind of a horror one of them's like a total boss fight in it. There's a lot of it that's reminiscent of the Bixby TV show, which I grew up watching, so it's just kind of fun to see those elements. I prefer Norton as Banner. So, I mean, yeah, the story's clunky. There's some dangling plot threads that aren't fully resolved in the movie. I understand why some people, if you grew up with the quippier post-Avengers MCU, this one just feels like this whole other thing that you're not that interested in. But it's not a bad movie. It might not be a total smash, but it's not a dud either. Next, Marvel's What If? And I actually really enjoyed the first season of the show, and based just on the first season, this would be quite a few spots higher up on the list. I just liked the idea of taking these classic MCU stories, changing one ingredient, and seeing how that played out, and there'd always be like a second change in the middle of it. And then likewise, in season 1, they kind of built out this other mythology with the Guardians of the Multiverse, and kind of had their own little Avengers level event inside of it that, to me, worked. And it felt like there was dramatically diminishing returns with each of the follow-up seasons, where they tried to copy some of that stuff in season 2, and it just wasn't all that interesting, or it felt strained. And then season 3 felt like they just ran out of good ideas. And it felt like any of us could sit down and spitball better what if scenarios than the ones they went with in season 3. So overall, I like the novelty of these little standalone little things. I read What If comics back in the 90s, but the show overall lost its momentum as it went along. 31, Thor, an important film in building out the cosmic MCU, but also a film kind of showing some of the growing pains as they were figuring that out. One thing that, looking back, I really appreciate about Phase 1 is that the MCU hadn't locked in its cinematic vocabulary and style yet. And so this film distinctly feels like a Kenneth Branagh film with its Shakespearean grandeur, except set in Asgard and playing in the world of the MCU. It was distinct. It has its own vibe to it. They absolutely nailed the casting, whether you're talking about the legacy actors that brought credibility at the time so that they could take a chance on a pair of unknowns. Luckily, the pair of unknowns they cast turned out to be Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston that absolutely knocked it out of the park in their respective roles. The film is another one that is structured a little bit in a bit of an odd fashion where our lead character isn't off trying to resolve the main conflict of the movie. He's off unaware of our main villain threat, working on his own subplot about being worthy. And it's only at the very end of the movie he even realizes the main plot's happening and has to rush back to save Asgard from everything taking place. So it creates a certain lack of tension in the story. Then maybe there's a little bit of a tonal disconnect in the movie where there's the Shakespearean royalty and all of that in Asgard, and then it's a fish out of water comedy on Earth. What? And there's supposed to be a juxtaposition there, but it doesn't flow as smoothly as between the two as it probably should. So it establishes several essential elements of the MCU, in particular Thor and Loki, but it's also a film where you can feel them trying to figure out how to do the cosmic and the earthly in the same universe at the same time. It's a good one, but it never has you shouting.
I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
30, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Here the MCU went from their biggest and heaviest film, Avengers Infinity War, to their smallest and most lighthearted film, Ant-Man and the Wasp. The stakes here are ant-sized. It is a simple MacGuffin story, and that's exactly what I find refreshing about this movie, that it's not trying to have the most extravagant set pieces or threat. It's a simple mid-tier film, and I think it's okay for the MCU to put out movies that aren't designed to constantly go bigger and bigger and bigger than every other film. It's not pretentious, it's not self-important, it has no grander goal other than having a simple, straightforward, fun little adventure. Besides the post-credit scene, it doesn't feel like it has the weight of the MCU on its shoulders. It's just a very pleasant little experience. Next, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, essentially a what-if TV show about an alternate timeline where Spider-Man got his powers in a slightly different way from Doctor Strange and was mentored by Norman Osborn instead of Tony Stark. And it's just kind of interesting to see the events of Phase 3 of the MCU play out from this different perspective. And of course, Spider-Man's a great character with an awesome rogues gallery. And because it's on its own Earth, they're able to kind of bring in some of these side characters. Daredevil makes an appearance, and you can play it out without fearing for the grander ramifications of the MCU. At the same time, because it is in its own little timeline, it just kind of feels inconsequential and just like another just another Spider-Man show that I wouldn't necessarily watch if it wasn't connected to the MCU. And that kind of just holds it back for me because it just doesn't have much of importance to it because of the nature of the project. It's an interesting novelty, it's charming, it's enjoyable, but these other ones just feel more important. 28, Doctor Strange. There's so much in this movie that I love that I wish I could put it higher up on the list, but there's just a few things about it that hold it back. Now, when it comes to the world building here and our introduction to the magic side of the MCU, there is so much here to absolutely love as you follow this arrogant doctor into this world that absolutely humbles him, but also brings out the best in him. Visually, there's so much to love in the wizarding world. I actually got to talk with the director Scott Derrickson earlier this year. We talked specifically about that.
Doctor Strange, I think, easily has the most interesting and creative visuals to it. And I've described it to people, it's like you took Dark City and Inception and Escher drawings and a kaleidoscope, threw them in a blender, and then made them into these...
Oh, and don't forget the biggest influence, Steve Ditko's comics, which were visually works of art.
Right, and you pull that all together.
This movie features the most thrilling and exciting and visually interesting wizarding battles I think that any movie has ever put on display, and this movie has the coolest, most creative visuals in the entire MCU. But as much as it has the most creative visuals in the MCU, it also feels like we're taking this wild, inventive world and mashing it awkwardly into a formulaic plotline. So it hits all the beats that you're supposed to have in an MCU origin story. The villains here aren't the most compelling or interesting. And so that always holds it back because the packaging, the visuals, the performances, I think are better than the story itself. 27, Iron Man 3, a movie that's a lot better than many give it credit for. A big part of that is Shane Black's clever writing, which fits Robert Downey Jr. really well. He's able to write witty dialogue that Robert Downey Jr. is able to knock out of the park. Robert Downey Jr. is set up to be partnered up with this kid, and so just some fun new dynamics that all serve many of his best skills. They find a way to give Tony a journey that has plenty of action for him, but also doesn't just rehash what we've seen before. And there's also plenty of memorable action sequences, in particular the plane sequence. But at times, Shane Black can get a little bit too clever and subversive for his own good, in particular the Mandarin twist, which trades a menacing and memorable villain for a significantly less interesting villain in Killian.
So I made a decision and it was wrong. It was a bad call, Ripley.
Likewise, it's a film that finds itself in this very kind of strange middle zone where it's not really a standalone film because it's overtly following up Avengers, and at the end of it, it pretends as if we're closing out Tony's arc, but it's inconsequential to the grander MCU because Age of Ultron essentially ignores the ending of this film, and so it makes it a movie that's kind of easy to overlook in the grander scheme of the MCU. There's a lot in here that I really, really enjoy as its own thing. I think it's a solid, subversive Shane Black action movie with a great lead actor. Next, Werewolf by Night, one of the strangest, quirkiest, and most unique projects in the entire MCU. Takes place in its own little pocket corner of the MCU that establishes its own lore, characters, puts up a conflict, runs us through a little adventure, gives us some action, some twists, some turns, has its own payoff, resolves its story by the end of it, and we move on, and that's it. It's a little diversion. It's a low risk, super niche little project that I'm glad that it exists, and it exists in such a peculiar way. Then we have Daredevil Born Again, a good project that should have been great, that could have been an absolute disaster. For some absolutely insane reason, originally, they hired some hack writers from some TV show that nobody's ever watched that came in that wanted to cast Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio in essentially a total reboot of Daredevil, which, as someone that adores the original run of Daredevil, I find that to be so unbelievably cynical and offensive to think that they can just steal these like the characterizations and pull them into their own thing and abandon all of the work that the writers, directors, and the rest of the cast did on the original run. Luckily, after they shot half of it, they realized this thing is garbage, brought in the Punisher creative team to do this big old overhaul where they shot a couple new episodes and did a whole bunch of reshoots, and for the most part were able to correct the ship, at least as best as possible, considering the catastrophic starting material that they had. They made the insane decision to get rid of a fantastic supporting cast and replace them with a bunch of mediocre people that are totally forgettable. But it actually works overall. Is it like Charlie and Vincent are so good in these roles, and they're in a different enough place in their life that it works. It's great to see them. It's still gritty. It's still violent. And there's enough tension to make it work. And I'm very excited to see where they're going to go in the back half of it, where it's the complete new team taking over and not having to work around the insane original stuff. 24, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. One of the things the MCU has always done a pretty good job of is having that general MCU feel, but bringing in outside genres and merging them together. And with this project, they merged the MCU with a variety of different martial arts subgenres. Where, if you don't know my backstory, my first movie review webpage was a Jackie Chan fan webpage way back in the 90s. And in this movie, from the very get-go, you get the elegant wire fu of like a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Later on, you get much more kind of Jackie Chan-based fighting choreography, like in the bus fight sequence. All throughout it, you get some of the best fights in the entire MCU. Our villain here is one that has a more relatable and personable, I don't know if that's the way to phrase it, motivation that just kind of makes him more compelling than most. 2/3 of the movie is just great, more grounded stunt work. That's what I want more of in the MCU. The third act kind of loses me a little bit, where most of the Trevor stuff doesn't work for me in the film. And when the third act goes full CGI, heavy battles with dragons, none of that stuff is as interesting to me as the actual martial arts stunt choreography, where it's a film that I feel like had it had a lower budget and leaned into a big martial arts spectacle rather than CGI spectacle in the third act, I would have liked that a lot more than what they gave us. And sometimes a bigger budget actually hurts you a little bit. But there's a whole lot here that I really do enjoy, in particular, bringing in martial arts into the MCU. That'll bring us to Hawkeye. And a lot of people were kind of negative on this one. This has always been one of my favorite of the Disney Plus shows because it actually felt like a TV show. It was street level. It had the stakes and episodic nature of actual TV, while taking one of our main Avengers and putting him front and center for the first time. It's a little bit of passing the baton to Kate Bishop, and I like the Kate Bishop character. I think she's fun, she's charming.
Can I tell you a secret?
Please don't do this.
I was talking to an Avenger.
There's enough of a backstory there to make her believable as this person kind of joining along in the adventure. You get some surprise cameos in there, like from Yelena, that kind of fleshes out the world a little bit. It would have, I think, holding back on revealing that Kingpin was the villain was a mistake that made for a pleasant surprise twist, but it would have played much better for the story overall if that had been introduced earlier on and actually fully play out the character. But overall, this to me is what a Disney Plus TV show should be. It should feel like television. 22, Avengers Age of Ultron. Coming off the original Avengers, which was just such a surprising, refreshing crowd pleaser, this one's always been a bit of a disappointment, but being disappointing doesn't mean bad. The individual scenes, sequences, lines of dialogue, action bits are just as good, if not better, than the first film. In fact, I think the costumes look better, and the movie overall, when it comes to like the cinematography, looks dramatically more cinematic than the first film. And there's a number of just like great, iconic Avengers action sequences in here. But the reason it's kind of remembered for being disappointing is that on a story level, it's just way too overstuffed. And it's probably the most confusing movie in the entire MCU, where it just kind of drops us into the middle of a story and expects us to play catch up. And we're constantly moving this plot forward where we're playing catch up with why we're doing what we're doing. And with time, we kind of know why this is, that there was a lot of behind the scenes trouble where Joss Whedon had all these ideas he wanted to bring to the table and wanted this whole long sequence at Hawkeye's house. And Marvel Studios wanted to set up future films and kept pushing him to add more and more visions in the sequence, setting up Thor Ragnarok. And they were competing over what they did and didn't want in the film. There was apparently an original screening of it that people found to be ponderous and meandering. It was over 3 hours long, but Joss Whedon wanted his final cut to be shorter than the first Avengers film. Well, when you're trying to have more plot, more characters, more action, more jokes, but a shorter runtime, you just have to rush through everything. And I think you feel that watching this movie. That doesn't make it bad. Like I said, I think this is a very enjoyable film, but also a very flawed film. And that because the other Avengers movies are so good, people, I think, sometimes unfairly judge it based off of a curve rather than based off of its own merits. 21, WandaVision, the original Marvel Disney Plus show, remains one of the best, where they made this show that was a celebration of sitcoms across the decades that's also a reflection and study in loss and tragedy.
But what is grief, if not love persevering?
While having kind of this Twilight Zone-esque mystery and intrigue on top of the entire thing. And for the most part, it feels tonally consistent while doing a lot of really different things. It can be very funny, and it can be gut-wrenching at the exact same time.
I can't feel you.
Now, if it had been able to fully stick the landing, it would have jumped up a good number of spots on here, but the finale feels a little bit too much like a generic MCU climax with people in capes punching each other in the face, and it teases some multiverse stuff that it doesn't deliver on, that just kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth at the end.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner. I thought my jokes were bad.
Bringing us into the top 20, the Loki series, one of the most quirky and unique projects in the entire MCU, and one that feels like it has its own unique aesthetic to it. Where the MCU at times can be known for a certain sameness, projects that feel directed by committee, even some projects I really enjoy have that similar feel to them. And then you get to Loki, and everything about it is distinct. It has this analog sci-fi vibe to it. We're going to this world with all these wacky, weird versions of Loki. We're time traveling. It's a bit of a crime procedural. It's an investigation. It ties into the multiverse. It's kind of all of these different things while having a distinct unifying flair and vision to the entire thing. A big part of this is that this is one of the very few MCU projects that didn't rely on reshoots.
This is maybe the only show or movie in the history of Marvel that had zero additional photography.
What they wrote is what they filmed. And they knew what their vision was from the beginning. And you feel that when you watch both seasons of the show. They're cohesive, they're unified, and they were trying to bring specific ideas, plot lines, arcs to the screen, and they did it. 19, Ant-Man, probably the greatest what could have been story of the entire MCU, because Edgar Wright was attached to make this movie for over 10 years. His involvement with Ant-Man predates the existence of the MCU. Over the years, many of us got very antsy waiting for an Edgar Wright Ant-Man film in the MCU. But when Edgar Wright was hired to direct Ant-Man, Marvel Studios was this small, independent, scrappy studio trying to make movies using a bank loan. But as delays happened and Edgar Wright did other projects, the MCU grew to this gigantic franchise that was purchased by Disney and became the biggest franchise in the world. And so suddenly, this outsider Edgar Wright is having to work inside of this studio system that he didn't originally sign up to work for. And this is another case of the New York City Creative Committee being very antagonistic towards the Vision's director.
Antagonistic towards the Vision's director.
And they didn't see his contributions to be particularly important. And this led to a very unpleasant experience for Edgar Wright, where they kept giving him notes. They rewrote him without his permission. And eventually he went, I'm not doing this. And he left. Granted, this is a film that, as is, I think they still turned out a really good MCU film that once again incorporates a new genre. It's a heist film. It's a smaller scale little adventure, and that's what makes it kind of distinct inside of the MCU. It doesn't have these world-ending stakes. It's a much more personal story, and that allows the little character moments and the actors to really shine. I love Paul Rudd's little antics. It's great to see Michael Douglas in a movie like this. And so for me, as soon as I can put aside the wondering what could have been if Edgar Wright had made this movie, the movie that they did make has so much personality to it.
Ants.
18, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. And I just find this to be such a charming little addition to the MCU and a project that made me enjoy Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 more simply because of the dynamic of these two characters in this special.
We're looking for the legendary Kevin Bacon.
We're looking for the legendary Kevin Bacon.
They take a little joke from the original Guardians of the Galaxy and they turn it into this insane misunderstanding and very sweet, misguided Christmas present for Star-Lord.
You're coming with us. That's a Christmas present.
It's very rewatchable. It's got some great musical numbers in it. It's led to many very fun moments in my household with my children singing along to some of the insane little stories inside of it. But it just does what James Gunn is able to do so well. Take these misfits, tell very insane stories that are also very heartfelt and sincere.
Something special he will never forget.
What about someone special?
17, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and of all the MCU projects, without question, this is the one that was dealt the absolute worst hand, where Ryan Coogler had fully developed the story and script, believing Chadwick Boseman was going to star in the film, and then of course he tragically died in the fall of 2020, just months away from when they were supposed to start shooting the film, leading them to have to both grieve the loss of someone that they knew while trying to figure out how to pivot the story. And because of that, you get a film that is very deeply emotionally resonant because it plays like a funeral. It is an actual emotional release for the people that made the film, but also us as the audience. We become connected to these characters, and we are, of course, aware of the real-life events surrounding the film, and you bring that into the experience of watching the movie. For that reason, it drew out big emotions to me when I watched it, but it's also not a movie that I'm very quick to want to return to because it is such a heavy experience to watch it. Angela Bassett gives one of the absolute best performances in the entire MCU. And so there's a lot in here that I really enjoy. I don't think the social commentary feels quite as organic this time around. Ryan Coogler's kind of shared what his original vision was for the film and how it was a father-son story about T'Challa having a son that he wasn't there for the first 5 years of his life because of the blip. That sounds like a more compelling storyline overall than the movie that we ended up getting, or compelling in its own way and not just as kind of a reflection on the real life tragedy that led to the creation of the film. And so it's a movie that I have so many like mixed feelings about that are very big and rich feelings. It's a movie that leaves an impact and a mark, but in a very different way from every other film on this list. Next up, Deadpool and Wolverine. Do I think there's a good story here? Not particularly. But is this a wildly entertaining fan event that does manage to have a lot of heart and emotion, in particular because of Hugh Jackman's gravitas? Yes, it does. They found a way
in Toronto on the first X-Men movie, where I was a low man on a producerial totem pole, where Hugh was, just excited to have a gig and give something a shot, and now to meet again at very different points in our careers has been wonderful.
It's a surprisingly effective celebration of the Fox Marvel universe. Not just the beloved projects, but all of them, even the ones that weren't as popular, are celebrated here and honored. And it kind of respects the fact that Fox, in a lot of ways, laid the foundation that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was able to build on top of, and you feel that while you're watching this movie. It's a little bit of a gimmick film, or it's a lot of a gimmick film. It relies entirely on nostalgia to work, but it does work. As I said before, the plot here is basically a rehash of Loki Season 1, Episode 5, except in cinematic form. And it's disappointing that it doesn't have grander implications for the wider MCU, but it is just such an entertaining film, and it's just great to finally see Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds together in their signature roles. And it is just as satisfying and funny and entertaining as you want it to be.
But I said, Logan's going to be my last. I knew what the script, I was excited about. I thought this is going to be perfect. And 3 days after that announcement, I saw Deadpool 1. And I remember watching it going, oops.
15, Captain America, the First Avenger. Like Thor, I love how this film truly feels director-driven, with its own unique aesthetic. They hired Joe Johnston to direct the film.
He did a ton of design work on the original Star Wars movies, the X-Wing, the Millennium Falcon, he had a hand in. The storyboards, the action sequences in Raiders of the Lost Ark, October Sky, The Rocketeer. His career's been leading up to this, to doing a Marvel period movie.
And he brought that to this film. And even the lenses that they used create a specific scope and size to the shots that feels different from what you get in later MCU films and puts you in a time and a place, or this alternate time and place. They gave the vehicles this Art Deco, diesel punk vibe to them, and they just look unique and interesting.
We've never done something where we had to recreate an actual time in history. It was great to be a part of a movie that had such an authentic vibe to it.
And beyond that, Alan Silvestri delivers one of my absolute favorite scores in the entire MCU. The first hour of the film, where it's Captain America's origin story, is some of my favorite stuff in the entire MCU, where he just has this, classic sense of nobility and all-American values, just a black and white sense of right and wrong and responsibility. There's something very inspiring of a character that is altruistic like that. And they cast it perfectly. And it wasn't obvious at the time because Chris Evans had played Johnny Storm before this, but he absolutely was able to embody all of that without being cheesy.
This character, the nature of this character and who he is different in that he's very earnest, he's upfront, he's a guy who doesn't really care what people think about him. He's not cynical, there's nothing cynical about this movie. I think that we're ready for just a guy who just wants to do the right thing.
But what holds it back from being a truly top tier MCU film for me is that I just don't find the Red Skull stuff to be all that interesting. Every time it cuts to Red Skull, I feel like the momentum of the story kind of grinds to a halt. And in even kind of the way that it kind of montages through World War II, and then suddenly we're in a third act. Maybe there was some way to handle that a little bit better. But, its ability to make you care about Steve and Peggy and their little romance and his sacrifice at the end. It's sappy and old-fashioned in the best way possible. So there's just so much in here that I love. 14, Thor Ragnarok. Here they followed up one of their most mediocre and bland films with possibly the most vibrant movie in the entire MCU, where from the costume design, the color scheme, the score, Everything just oozes personality and gave the franchise the overhaul it desperately needed. Yes! It pushes the boundaries of just how silly and comedic the MCU can go without fully crossing the line. It pushes the boundaries in ways that makes it interesting and edgy, but it still manages to take the material seriously, have stakes and weight to it, where what happens in this movie actually matters moving forward. And there's enough emotion in it. There's a couple parts where they undercut the drama by killing characters off or putting a joke in at the wrong place.
Because that's what heroes do.
But other than that, a movie that's just a great addition to the MCU and by far the best Thor film. Next up, Spider-Man Homecoming. Marvel Studios finally got to produce a Spider-Man movie, and what did they do? They made it a full-blown high school movie, which just makes for such a refreshing addition to the franchise and a new spin on the character. We're getting a high schooler's perspective on the events of the world of the MCU, and we're just seeing what a high school superhero would do in this universe.
Hey Karen, what else can this suit do? What?
Adding to that, you got Robert Downey Jr., who has great chemistry with everyone, so of course he's got great chemistry with our new Spider-Man, and we got a great villain in here in the Vulture, who's a little bit of like the Walter White of the MCU, guy that feels cheated by the system and turns to crime to make ends meet, and turns into the worst version of himself while still trying to be the family man. And so it's not the biggest movie, it's not the most grandiose, but it delivers just like such a nice new angle, a new way to do a Marvel movie that fits in perfectly, but feels fresh at the same time.
You're that Spider guy on YouTube, right? Call me Spider-Man! Okay, Spider-Man!
12, Spider-Man No Way Home. This is a perfect example of how you can have a movie that is wildly effective, incredibly entertaining, and draw out big emotions, while also not really having all that good of a story.
Brilliant but lazy.
The basic setup here about Peter Parker trying to get into college and going to his wizard friend to change the universe feels like a very sitcom-esque setup for a movie. But from this very mundane setup, they delivered a really special fan event. That if you were there in the theater opening weekend, you know just how cool it was to see these guys show up on screen together.
It was so crazy in there, like literally like everyone was standing up and screaming.
I know, my voice is gone. I was clapping, screaming.
There's a bunch of parts where people are like, whoa!
It pulled and tugged at all the nostalgia, heartstrings, all of that fun stuff to just feel special and be so incredibly satisfying. And it's also wild that this movie came together because 2 years before the movie came out, Disney and Sony had broken up. Tom Holland barely was able to pull them back together. Then COVID happened and they were like rewriting the movie. They couldn't decide on the ending of the film. There's all these reasons this thing should have fallen apart. It shouldn't have worked. The story was a little bit flimsy. But movies aren't just about having the most efficient, tightest story. They're about so much more than that. And so a movie can work even if you've got issues with it. And this is an example of that. Then we have Thunderbolts, or the New Avengers. And this is the first MCU film to be made after they made a massive overhaul behind the scenes, that they realized that they had been microwaving scripts, spreading themselves too thin, and so they did this big evaluation in 2023, delayed a bunch of things. So the last of that movie from that batch was Captain America: Brave New World, and the first one to come after all of that is Thunderbolts. And I feel like you can absolutely feel that this is a movie made with more care from the very beginning of the film, where this is an MCU film that is truly a movie about something. It's about purpose and depression, finding family. And so it's exploring ideas with, thematic depth to them, where each of the characters have trauma and they deal with it differently. And we play that out across the movie. It is pulling in inspiration from a bunch of other places, whether that's, like an MCU film from A24. The director has talked about some of his influences.
And we had been looking at references from Binja Malkovich and early Gondry stuff, just for like how kind of some of our more surrealist sequences feel. So there was this idea of trying to have it be as in camera as possible.
And so while it has action sequences, the quips, all the things you expect from one of these movies, it's also bringing in these outside influences. They tried to be as practical as possible. And so we're doing stunt work in it. And even when they start to do more surrealist elements in the third act of it, they tried to do as much of that in camera as was possible.
There's a lot of grounded stuff in this movie and a lot of grounded action. There is a whole surrealist side to the film. And I think that traditionally in this world, you might, lean pretty hard on visual effects to do that. Close to it in camera, that's just sort of augmented by effects.
And so there's just a tangibility to everything in the film, even when it gets pretty weird and wacky in the third act. So for me, this was the MCU finding its footing again, getting traction, heading in the right direction, and watching this felt like I was watching a Phase 3 movie again. Bringing us into the top 10, the Fantastic Four First Steps. And just like with Thunderbolts, this continues to feel like the MCU finding their footing again, and projects not feeling like they're directed by committee, but giving directors proper oversight to be able to bring something new to the table. And in particular with this project, they didn't rush it out. They first announced it 6 years ago, and we spent a long time waiting to figure out who was going to cast, who was going to direct it, all of that fun stuff. And then you see the movie, and I feel like you feel that when you watch the movie, that this is some of the best world building possibly ever in the MCU. Because it's on its own Earth in the 1960s with this retro future Jetsons-esque aesthetic to everything, everywhere you go feels so detailed, where these little things that you want to explore, and you're paying attention to billboards and the technology and how they do things, and it's familiar, but it's also totally different. And I just loved exploring a new world. I thought the actors all had great chemistry with one another. And maybe Johnny Storm's a little bit subdued, but he still has the Johnny-isms in there at the same time. And then we go into the space segments of the movie, and there's parts of it that were like reminiscent of Interstellar, Star Trek 4, all while being an MCU action sequence with a space surfer chasing a spaceship. I mean, just wild stuff that just felt like we're doing something new that's so comic booky, that's so sci-fi. So I just got sucked into this world and wanted to spend more time in it with these characters. Number 9, Black Panther, the only MCU film ever to be nominated for Best Picture, and for a lot of good reasons. It's a film that's able to deliver the entertainment factor that you expect from an MCU film, while also bringing in Shakespearean drama and relevant themes and ideas and exploring them in a profound way, where the villain is still a villain, but at the same time, he's able to change our hero to push Wakanda to be better. And in that level, it's a movie that is more morally complex, dramatically interesting, and like kind of Fantastic Four, has its own fascinating world building where we're going into Wakanda, and Ryan Coogler kind of brought in his own production designers to give Wakanda such its own unique vibe that was unlike anything else we'd seen in the world of MCU, because it was meant to be so distinctly African future. And you feel that, like, once again, we're in an interesting new place with new technology. It loses me a little bit somewhat in the third act, where we kind of like have, war rhinos and stuff like that, and some shoddy CGI that's not as, like, the action isn't as good as the drama and character work, But besides that, another amazing MCU film. 8, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. In the middle of Phase 5, where so many MCU projects felt directed by committee, reworked in post, you get Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, such a distinctly James Gunn film, and a movie that felt like it was of the consistency and quality that we got out of the previous decade. Which probably has a lot to do with the fact that the script was written in the last decade. This movie was supposed to kick off Phase 4 of the MCU, and James Gunn had written the script, and then some old tweets that he'd made a decade before were resurfaced. They were offensive jokes, and so he got fired.
Oh no.
And while he was fired, WB hired him. That led to him doing the Suicide Squad. That led to him getting hired to be the guy that is over the DCU in the Superman movie that just came out. But also Disney came to their senses and went, wait a minute, we probably shouldn't fire you over tweets that you made years before you even worked for us. So we got the job back and finally directed this movie. And it is classic James Gunn.
Analogy.
Is it?
Metaphor.
It is quirky and weird. It leans into the wackier cosmic elements about all these animals and stuff like that. And at the same time, it is gut-wrenching, and he's able to find such deep human emotions out of the weirdest elements. Whether you're talking about Rocket's friends and what happens to them, or Drax being this very dopey person and having these very heartfelt moments where you realize he's just always meant to be a dad. It's emotionally resonant. It's just as funny as his other films. And it's just such a satisfying send-off for our Guardians, and sometimes in unexpected ways, because I even wanted it to be more I went in expecting it to be more tragic and was so satisfied with the way that it wasn't as tragic as I was expecting, but it was tragic in other ways. Next, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, one of the best crafted and more mature films in the entire MCU, where they took Captain America, a character known for his black and white morality, and put him in the most interesting situation they could put him in.
So we began pitching the sort of 70s deconstructionist version of what Captain America is, a character who just wants to serve his country. How do you put that character in a place where he has to basically do the opposite of that?
When you take a character whose identity is built around trusting institutes and put him in a context where he has to go up against those institutes, suddenly a vanilla character becomes dramatically more interesting.
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right. I guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore.
Adding to that, while it is so overtly an MCU film with all the comic booky stuff, they decided to make it in a way that was much more grounded and realistic, which just makes for this more intense, tactile film.
Part of our creative process has always been, finding like incongruous elements to put together and and figure out a way to marry them and see what that does. And there was just something irresistible about taking a cinematic style that's associated with realism and naturalism and shooting an unreal superhero world with that style.
And then just giving it emotional weight. It's all about Steve and Bucky's friendship and the lengths that Steve will go for his friend, that just makes it very personal while the stakes are gigantic. And then you just have a movie that they put a lot of thought into all the little details.
There's a story floating around that you had talked about honest trailer proofing your movie.
We did. It was a big phrase that I would use when we were working on the script, and we would go through the script together, and if there were any sort of lapse in logic, it was always my phrase, like, I'm not gonna let honest trailers beat us up over this lapse in logic, so we're gonna fix this story point.
Put it together and you just get one of the best movies in the MCU. 6, The Avengers, an unashamedly straightforward and old-fashioned tale of good versus evil. And at the same time, It was a groundbreaking film because it was the first time that we'd ever gotten a superhero team-up story of this level. It has just never, it's commonplace now, but it has just never been done before. And so going into it, Joss Whedon didn't feel the need to subvert expectations or deconstruct heroism. He wanted it to be just a classic, old-fashioned superhero tale and lean into all the tropes and formulas that people love about these types of stories. And I think that's exactly the movie that it needed to be. The first time you do this, the first time you bring them together, you can tell that straightforward story, that there's not a lot of twists, turns, complexity to it, which means there's all sorts of room for the team to come together, banter.
I care how you speak, and he's my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
Fight with each other just a little bit, and then come together for that big slam-bang finale in the end. The plot is simple, the themes are earnest, and that's that sincerity. The straightforward nature to it is what's so refreshing. Every other time afterwards, you have to add complexity, the twists, the turns, you have to subvert expectations, you can't just stick to the formula. But the directness that you could, that one time that you can just tell the straightforward version, that's what they did here. And they did it in just such a crowd-pleasing kind of way. They cracked the code, they got the cast right, and luckily the cast all had chemistry with one another. So just a fun, enjoyable blockbuster that put an enormous grin on my face. And continues to put a huge grin on my face. Bringing us into the top 5, Captain America Civil War. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this movie is maybe the best example of just how special Phase 3 of the MCU actually was, where they were just firing on all cylinders and were able to bring together so many different storylines seamlessly. In the case of this movie, it is better than Avengers 2, but it also functions entirely as a Captain America movie. And where Age of Ultron struggled under the weight of the ever-expanding size of the MCU, this movie thrived in that exact same context. The size of the MCU is what made this movie special. It's a direct sequel to Age of Ultron as well as Captain America Civil War, while setting up Black Panther, Black Widow, and the downfall of the Avengers that leads the way for Thanos to be able to be victorious. And the only reason that you can tell this story and it works is because it is following up 2 phases of the MCU where these characters and their worldviews have been established.
How do we put them on opposite sides, and then how do we create a crisis moment for the two of them around this very personal revelation?
To see them, because we know their personalities so well, we know how they work together, and we know that they have some issues with each other. They're very, very different people. And how would they react if they were faced with an issue that they just disagreed about?
So when the scenario unfolds in this movie where the Avengers are facing the consequences of their actions, we as the audience are choosing sides with them. Each of these people are all here for different reasons, and here we are, 9 years later, still debating. Are you Team Cap or are you Team Iron Man? Because they did a great job of earning the conflict in the movie.
You know, if you were to just say on a surface level, well, who would agree to take orders from an authority figure and who wouldn't? Well, you'd think Captain America, who was a soldier in his own right, would agree to it. And Tony Stark, who's gone in front of the U.S. Senate and said, I'm not playing along with you guys, would not want to do it. So it's very interesting to see them very naturally and realistically grow to the opposite viewpoints.
It's a movie that's able to deliver a fun toy box action sequence with the airport sequence with all your heroes fighting each other.
It was very important to us to approach that sequence from every single character's point of view. Everybody had their reason for being there. Everyone had a crisis to deal with that had an emotional component for them.
But then the climax of the movie is ultimately just 2 friends fighting each other and that friendship dissolving. It's not the most spectacular action sequence in the MCU, not by a long shot, but it's one of the most important and impactful. That's when you've crafted a movie where the stakes make things important and meaningful, not just empty spectacle. That's what makes this movie special. In fourth, Guardians of the Galaxy, and another just perfect example of just how special the MCU could be during the last decade, where Kevin Feige was able to just discover unproven talent and trust them with some insane projects and deliver truly special films. And this might be the ultimate example of that, because the Guardians of the Galaxy were like D-list comic book characters.
What a bunch of a-holes.
And James Gunn had only directed these like hard edge, R-rated niche films. And the fact that they were oddball characters and he was an outsider and this was a wild chance is exactly what made it work. That he was given the freedom to just play around, and he's so good at taking weirdos and outsiders and finding their humanity and their relatability. So suddenly, a raccoon that loves machine guns is this tragic character. And we're able to take a line as sappy as "We Are Groot" and make it this poignant moment. That's what James Gunn is so good at. He's also great at knowing the perfect needle drop for every occasion and not just going to the most obvious songs that everyone else uses. He just has a deep knowledge of music and is able to line it up perfectly with sequences. And so this is a movie that is one of the most heartfelt in the MCU. It's one of the most sincere while being one of the weirdest movies. And all of that is what makes it special.
Said it yourself, bitch. We're the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comments section. If you're up for the challenge, share your ranking of every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, Disney Plus show, and special. If not, if you want to go with the easy way, just give me some of your favorites and the ones that you hate the most. Also, come back over the next few days. I'm going to be ranking the Fantastic Four movies, the MCU heroes, MCU villains. All that fun stuff is coming. I got a long week. I'm going to be tired shooting, writing, editing all week long. In third, Iron Man. Iron Man was basically an indie film funded by a bank loan to adapt a B- Marvel character starring a has-been ex-con that Marvel in New York City originally refused to hire, and they didn't have a completed script. But something magic happened while they were making the film. They cracked the code on how to consistently make comic book movies.
Kevin Feige had stepped into the role of running Marvel and really kind of, he imposed a kind of clarity of tone across those movies that like sort of figured out the trickiest thing, which is like, how do you balance a movie where you got people wearing like, pajamas and have superpowers, and how seriously do you take it, and how much humor is in it, and how much can you wink at the audience, and what does the action have to look like?
Well, and that tone that you and Robert discovered on that movie, I would say became the template in a way.
But that tone of a little bit of a fun, a little bit of a subversiveness, but then also a heart and an earnestness too.
Without the weight of the rest of the MCU on its shoulders, it's able to just tell a classic story with a character arc and a hero's journey, where our hero literally goes into a cave and comes out reborn and into a new person. It's not the most sophisticated film. It doesn't have all the flashy key jangling of the Avengers movies. It doesn't have the pacing of jokes that other movies had, but it's just great character and story work. So much of that comes down to the casting of Robert Downey Jr., who is absolutely perfect in the role.
When Favreau had the insight to cast him as Iron Man, I mean, it's one of the greatest casting decisions in the history of movies.
And not only is he perfect, but he makes everyone around him better. The crazy thing about this movie is that they really were kind of making it up as they go along.
Because they wrote it as they went along.
This was so amazing. You know, I don't know, $200 million or whatever the thing cost.
Yeah.
You'd think they would have a script.
Right.
You know, you would think.
Yes.
But no, we would often come to work and there would be no script for that scene today. Will you please relax? You are making a $200 million student film.
And generally speaking, that's probably not the best way to make a movie. And there's a bunch of examples in the MCU of that not working. But this is an example of where the producer, director, writers, and star were all in sync. They all were heading in the same direction, and so they were working together to build it as they went along, and therefore it worked. And when you're working from a clean slate, just trying to make a great movie, it's a lot easier to make a great movie with that fix it and post mindset. It's just such a fantastic tale of second chances, underdogs, and long shots. Tied for number 1, Avengers Endgame. Coming out of the theater initially, I loved this movie, but I did have a few issues, in particular the big Thorbowski. Here I am! But looking back, I just remember the good times.
And now, looking back on it, I just remember the good stuff.
Now, 6 years removed from the movie's release, I'm only more impressed with what they were able to pull off with this film. That they were just so in sync in paying attention to all these little details and dangling plot threads, and they were just able to pull it together and create a movie that has some of the greatest fan service of all time when you're talking about the third act of this movie, but it's also an exploration of failure and depression and how each of our heroes would deal with the failure of Infinity War, while finding a way to have to close out all of these different character arcs for our main Avengers. That little details, little lines of dialogue from the original Iron Man are so much more profound as you get to the end of Endgame.
I shouldn't be alive unless it was for a reason.
You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play.
And simply put, there's just so much awesome in the third act of this movie that sometimes at my house we'll just be like, hey, let's just watch the last hour of Endgame, because it is just like there's so many things that put such a big grin on your face that pay off moments from all throughout the Infinity Saga in such big ways.
I knew it.
Infinity War is the more consistent film, but the highs of Endgame are higher. But the two movies together really are the culmination of everything that makes the MCU awesome.
I have to go with Endgame just because how culturally significant that is, to be able to weep and laugh, and you can go watch the audience watching the movie, and it's captivating.
Yeah.
You know, I'm getting chills singing about it.
But also coming in at number 1, Avengers Infinity War. In so many ways, the ultimate comic book movie experience, where all of your favorite characters come together and it's so much fun. Because they went with a straightforward MacGuffin plotline, there's plenty of room for our characters to interact with each other, and there's so much fun banter that comes from that.
I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made-up names. I'm Spider-Man then.
But also plenty of room for action sequences that are comic book nerds' dream come true. As someone that grew up in an era where I had Christopher Reeve's Superman and Michael Keaton's Batman, the idea that one movie could have so many different comic book characters in it, it was just an amazing time to be a comic book movie fan during the last decade. But the thing that is kind of the secret sauce here is that they knew all of our Avengers are well established. And so the character that has the character arc is actually our villain. And so this guy with the most diabolical scheme in the history of the MCU suddenly is this sympathetic madman that you kind of understand where he's coming from. Add to that, it's a story that was bold enough to allow our heroes to fail, and you just get a movie that hits on all the different levels that when you think of what a comic book movie should deliver, This is it.
That was beautiful.
This is the magic of the MCU, so it comes in at number 1. If you enjoy this video, I've done a zillion other rankings of the MCU, the heroes, the villains, the final battles, the directors, and all the other different ways you can talk about it. That is right over there, I think, or it's right over there. Also, I've done individual spoiler reviews for all but one of the MCU films. Thank you so much for watching.